all hear me. Michelle, do you mind you stop sharing? Thank you. Thanks, Michelle. So yeah, welcome everyone for today's conversation. My name is Winnie Ogejo and I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs. The Institute of Economic Affairs is a public policy think tank that carries out research and conducts policy research to inform policy debates and discourses. So this is our webinar number 7. We have been having a series of webinars just to discuss largely COVID-19 and the impact it has had on the different sectors globally and even within our country. And the conversations have been very interesting, and I'm sure those who have been joining have been finding them very insightful. So this morning we want to have a conversation around COVID-19 and WASH preparedness, even as there's a lot of pressure for schools to reopen. So we want to have a conversation around water, sanitation and hygiene in our schools and the level of preparedness therein, even as we plan to have our children back to school. So before I go into my presentation, I'd like to indicate that we will request that we all have our microphones on mute and our cameras off. We'll only have the microphone and the cameras of those making the presentations on. And we will also request that we make use of the chat box icon that we have. So as our presenters will be making their presentations, you can kindly proceed to be noting down the questions you may have or the comments you may have regarding the presentations on the chat box, and the presenters will be glad to have a look at them and respond during the plenary sessions. So without further ado, I'll just go straight to my presentation. I hope we can all see the presentation. Michelle?
Yeah, Winnie.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I've already indicated the conversation is around water, sanitation and hygiene preparedness ahead of reopening of schools. And what we would like to capture during this presentation in the conversations we are going to have are the minimum requirements in terms of what guidelines have been put in place to ensure that schools and institutions are actually ready to receive the learners back in school. We are aware that the issues of WASH are not issues that have come with COVID-19. These are issues that were there before, but the magnitude or the impact it has is being revealed through this pandemic that we are experiencing. And like we've experienced with all these other sectors, and we've continually said that these issues that we are discussing are not issues that have come up with COVID-19. So even as we are coming up with the minimum requirements for the schools to put in place to ensure that learners can go back to school, we have to also give it a futuristic thinking such that if we are hit by a pandemic such as this, where issues of WASH must be thought about, then we should be ready because of the preparations we are making to handle this. So even as we will be discussing the minimum requirements, let us try to look into We are so sorry about that. We had a technical problem in the office. Michelle, can you hear me now? Yes, we can. Sorry about that. We had a technical issue at the office which has been sorted. So as I was indicating, back to this presentation about the enforceability, where we have to ensure that, yes, the government is making plans to conduct trainings for the head teachers of those institutions, but that training should not just end with the head teachers. We are suggesting the trainings continue even for the learners, for the support staff, because it's all of them who will be in the school. So if learners will be told to adhere to certain requirements without training and being informed about why they need to do so, then we will have a challenge. So on to the government guidelines. I hope you can see my next slide. The government guidelines that have been put in place are, as you can see on your screen, there is ensuring adequate, clean running water in the institutions, because there will be a lot of hand washing and just ensuring that at all times the learners are washing their hands, and that will require adequate clean running water, and then ensuring that sanitation facilities that are existing in those schools are refurbished, and even the toilets and the bathrooms. This will again be having a very deep discussion at a later point, because you realize that there are some institutions that you look at the bathrooms and the ratio of the learners and the bathroom available, then you realize there's a big problem. So even as we are speaking about refurbishing of sanitation facilities, we must also think of the necessity to have new bathrooms in some institutions. And then ensuring adequate liquid soap in the wash stations. Of course, we will be having in the learning institutions different wash areas and wash stations. So we have to ensure that at those points there is adequate liquid soap at all points, so that the learners are not just dipping their hands in the water and going back. Then that will not be helping with the situation. They need to use the soap. And then ensuring the non-contact thermometers, for obvious reasons. We have to keep checking the temperatures of the learners. Then the disinfectants that will be used to fumigate and to disinfect surfaces and contact areas where the learners are. And then the use of face masks, which we're going to discuss later. And we need to start thinking about sanitizer booths, which have been put in some counties, and we have seen that they can be effective. And then the elements of social distancing. And yeah, so in terms of number of learners that have been impacted on, we've had this conversation before, and we realized that for pre-primary, primary, and secondary, where we have the highest number of learners at 16.1 million, that's the area we will focus on during our conversation. Of course, we are aware that even universities and TVET institutions will be having the same challenges, and so even as we have these conversations, we will just have it with this set of learners, but having a broader having all the other learners in mind, right? So in terms of availability of face masks, which I said we would discuss at a later point, we want to discuss what the cost implication of availing masks to the 16.1 million learners. So we have two sets of masks that can be used. We have the disposable masks and we have the reusable masks. So if we are to buy for the 16.1 million learners disposable masks at a low of 13 Kenya shillings, then that would mean every day the government will be spending 209.3 million. And if they are to buy them monthly, then they'll be spending 4.2 billion. And if they're to buy it for the whole term, then they'll be spending 12.6 billion per term. And now this, we look at it in terms of availing a mask for each learner every day of school, right? So if that's the math we will be trying to work around.
Presentation.
Yeah, so sorry about that again. And then in terms of the reusable masks, if we are calculating at 50 Kenya shillings and giving a child 2 masks for every term, then that would mean that we will be spending 1.161 billion. Sorry, I'm being told that you can't see the presentation. Sorry about that. Can you now see the presentation?
Yeah, but only the second slide on highlights.
Okay. We are so sorry about that, guys. We are working on it. John, can you now see it?
Yeah, we can now see it.
All right. So this is the part I was trying to explain about the cost implications for the masks. So if you look at that math, and the cost implications that we're discussing, then you realize that in terms of cost effectiveness and environment friendliness and hygiene related issues, then we may have to go with the reusable masks. The only challenge with having the reusable mask would then be that we go back to the enforceability, where we are ensuring that all the children understand the importance of using the masks interchangeably, and ensuring that as they use this one today, the other one has been washed and is drying and is properly dried under the right conditions. So, and then still on the masks, we also have to think about persons with disability who might need to use the clear masks. Probably if we go to the institutions where we have our deaf learners and we have learners who actually read lips, then we must start thinking about the possibility of having the face shields where it's very clear they can see the face of the teacher and they can still continue with reading lips and understanding what the teachers are saying. So those are some of the things, even as we have these conversations, we need to understand, because having a wash that can enable the reduction look at the World Health recommendations in terms of hand washing time, they suggest that each person should wash their hands for at least 20 seconds. So we are going to use an example of a school in Kisumu. It's a school in Kisumu municipality, and we were having a conversation with the head teacher who indicated that they have 3,000 learners, just above, so 1,001 learners. And in that school, they only have 5 taps. And of course, the issue of adequate running water. So today, the water is there for part of the day, and then it's not there. So those are some of the things we need to think about. And so that means that for every tap, we have 600 learners using that tap. So the practicability of that, I'm sure Agnes and Sheila will be coming to explain to us. And if you look again at the time that they'll be using, it's not practical to just continue having the 5 taps in this school. So we did a math at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and we are saying if the taps are increased to a number of 30, then we'll have the learners washing their hands for around 33 minutes. Just to ensure that their hands are clean. And you can imagine in a whole day, we won't expect them to have one hand wash. We can expect them to have several. So what does that mean? And I'm sure Sheila and Agnes will be explaining that to us shortly. And still on that same school, there's also the element of sanitation where we are talking about their toilets. That same school only has 32 toilets. This means that approximately 100 learners are using one toilet. Yeah. So in terms of sanitation and ensuring hygiene and even reducing contact amongst the learners, that is something that we really need to think about, even as we are mounting pressure for reopening of schools. It is a good thing that we want the schools reopen, but how ready are the schools to receive our learners? So that's the conversation we want to have today, and we will be looking at the status of WASH in general, and then and then we'll narrow it down to our schools in Kenya and look at the minimum requirements for preparedness, looking at the WASH guidelines and what are the cost implications of ensuring those minimum requirements. And then we'll finally look at the challenges and the gaps therein. And of course, we will close with the recommendations before we proceed to do the plenary. And just as we're finishing this, my colleague will be posting a link from a renowned essayist. He's called Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Nassim has done a video and has done an article. The article is on the incompetence and errors in reasoning around face covering. That is the use of masks. And he's trying to analyze and give us perspective to the misconceptions that are there about the use of masks. And he is he's giving us the 6 he's talking about 6 issues that we have really been struggling with, and of course we would have shown you the video and the essay here, but I'm sure you can find time to go through it and just understand. And the video, he's speaking about the scientific analysis of the value of masks. So these are some of the things that even as we try to flatten the curve, these are things that we need to look at just to bring us to a point where we actually understand why it is important to continue using masks, not just for ourselves, but even for those around us. Because when you're using a mask, you're not only protecting yourself, but you're protecting the person next to you. So those are some of the conversations we'll have this morning. And without going too much into that, I would now like to invite our first panelist, Ms. Sheila Simiyu, who works with APHRC, and she will be speaking to us and giving us perspective on the status of WASH globally and narrowing it down to the Kenyan situation. Sorry, and then she'll give us the challenges that are there that we really need to start thinking about, and also the possible recommendations. So Sheila, you have 15 minutes. Thank you. Sheila?
Sorry, I was talking with my microphone off. Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Sheila. I am from the African Population and Health Research Center. And thanks, Winnie, for the introduction. So I'll not waste much time. I'll go straight into talking about WASH preparedness ahead of schools reopening. And for this presentation today, because we only have 15 minutes, I will basically talk about 3 things, and that's bring us back to the basics where we understand why it is important to have water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities. And then we'll go deeper into what considerations do we need to make if we are going to reopen schools, and finally talk about the specific WASH considerations before we reopen schools. So I'll begin with basically just reminding us the importance of WASH. Next slide, Winnie. I'll begin by, do you want me to share? Yeah, thanks. So I'll basically just remind us about the importance of having water, sanitation, and hygiene. And from a very basic perspective, we all know about the importance of WASH to our health in prevention of mainly fecal oral disease. But also there's the importance of water, sanitation, and hygiene just for general well-being, for our mental wellness, and also for our, as you nowadays also hear, for our menstrual hygiene and menstrual health preparedness and menstrual health hygiene matters. But also, when we talk about WASH, we talk about if we have enough water, sanitation, and hygiene, then we're able to save time. And if we're able to save time, then we talk about people who have to fetch water, people who have to fetch sanitation, people who have to go to toilets if they're close by. That leads to saving time, and that time can then be used for other productive activities, which then contributes to economic development of any country. And finally, on the left, we talk about the importance of having water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities in institutions. And here we talk about schools. This is where we talk about schools. This is where we talk about correctional facilities. We also talk about the importance of WASH in for example, workplaces and, say, banking facilities. So generally institutions. So as we talk about institutions, let me now go back into schools and the importance of WASH in schools. And next slide. And we all know about the importance of having water, sanitation, and hygiene in our schools and learning institutions. Yes, thanks, Winnie. So we understand how just having enough water, enough sanitation facilities provides the learners with adequacy in terms of having water and also having sanitation facilities. But also, if we have adequate water, then we are able to have the learners practice personal hygiene, and this also includes the menstrual hygiene and menstrual health management. But specifically, as we've also mentioned, it prevents ill health and prevents disease, and therefore learners are able to perform well, or rather it promotes learning performance because then diseases have been reduced. But also hygiene education leads to development of healthy behaviors, leads to development of life skills that learners can then take on as they grow and as they develop into their later years. And that has also been shown to be a potential avenue where learners then are agents of change, where they take the messages that they learn in schools and they are change agents at their homes and even within the community. And like I've also mentioned, if we have WASH in schools, then it increases access, and we are able to contribute to the overall national development goals and the SDG agenda. So I'll talk about the next slide. I'll talk about generally what do we need to consider when we talk about reopening our schools. And Winnie has alluded to that, but three things which work together, and that's the fact that we need to reduce transmission from one person to another. We need to make sure that surfaces are clean, and therefore there is reduction of any exposure to surfaces that are contaminated. And we also need to make sure that we properly manage the individuals, either whether they show symptoms or not. So these three opportunities, or these three avenues work together, but I'll dwell more on the reduction of person-to-person transmission, mainly by focusing on WASH in our schools. So next. Yeah, so talking about reduction of person-to-person transmission in our schools, we are basically talking about three things, and that's mainly ensuring that you have physical distancing or social distancing, as we call it, and then respiratory hygiene, and then where we'll dwell on today is where we have hand hygiene or hand washing with soap. In terms of physical distancing, strategies that we can use is to make sure that we have cues in the environment that helps us to know where we can maintain physical distances. And this I'm sure we've seen in places like supermarkets, where you're guided and told this is where you need to step and this is where you need to maintain the physical distances. But in schools also, we might need to have strategies like limiting the gatherings, and also probably ensuring that we have different times where kids need to be in school, and such measures. Respiratory hygiene is all about how do we follow guidelines and how do we ensure that we are maintaining proper respiratory hygiene. And this is where we have always heard about coughing or sneezing into our elbow, and also making sure that we use masks, as Winnie has alluded. But I'll specifically now dwell on hand hygiene, and there are 3 or 4 key areas, which is ensuring that we have adequate supplies, and then what we call modifying the environment so that learners are reminded to wash their hands and to maintain hand hygiene. And then to also talk about providing adequate messaging and age-appropriate COVID-19 or hygiene education messaging. And then creating schedules or routines that encourage hand hygiene or hand washing with soap. So I'll go into each of these in a little more detail. And I'll begin by, next slide, talking about having adequate water, sanitation and hygiene facilities. Next slide. All right, good, thanks. So as we talk about adequacy in terms of an enabling environment, we are basically mentioning that we need to have basic hand washing services. And when we talk about basic, we are talking about just the fact that we need to have enough water and soap. And if we don't have water and soap, then an alcohol rub or hand sanitizer. We need to ensure that such facilities are available. But again, it's not about availability, but are they available at key locations? And we've always heard about how many times we wash our hands. So if we need to wash our hands, for instance, and maintain hand hygiene, then we need to have water and soap available, for instance, at the school entrances. We also need to make sure that we have water and soap available at food preparation areas, water and soap available at, say, toilets and also at the eating area. And such photos, as you can see, are, say, hand washing areas, and these are specifically in a school in Kampala, where we have a number of hand washing stations directly after the toilets, and a number of kids can queue there and wash their hands. But also the lower picture just shows availability of soap. But we need, just to show that we need to think about not just having water, but also having soap available, and also having adequacy, so that then we don't have too many kids crowding at one place, or we don't have a situation where we have run out of soap. And so, next slide, we still need to ask ourselves a number of questions as we think about reopening schools. And in terms of accessibility and availability, we're asking, do we even have, do schools have water? Are they connected to the water supplies? Then we also need to ensure that these connections need improvement. Are they, for example, in as much as they are connected, are they, say, do they need improvement in the sense that, say, some of them need to ensure that the pipe, there's flowing water and consistency in terms of the water being available. But we also need to have to ensure that they have adequate water storage capacity to serve the number of pupils or the number of students in each learning institutions. So do we have enough water storage capacity, for instance, tanks and other storage facilities? And in terms of soap, are we having enough either soap or sanitizer for the students? And also hand washing facilities, are they accessible, are they inclusive, and are they convenient? Of course, when we talk about these three things, we're talking about accessibility in terms of, are they within reach, inclusivity in terms of students or students who cannot access, for example, those with disabilities, are they inclusive of all this? And are they convenient in the sense that can they be accessed at the right locations? And I've already mentioned about this, about having these hand washing facilities at the right place, for instance, after the toilet and at the entrances. So that's one aspect. How is the environment? We need to create an enabling environment. And then as we move to the next section, where we talk about now hand hygiene, we talk about modifying the environment or having small changes within the environment that then trigger or remind learners to wash their hands or to maintain hand hygiene. And this is when we talk about environmental modification or having cues within the environment that remind the learners, especially the young, walk towards the hand washing station. And as you can see from the photo on your right, that is an example of cues or nudges that were used in a school in Bangladesh. Guide the learners from the toilets towards the hand washing facility. So are these strategies that we can think about having? But also looking in Kampala, where we are seeing students are being reminded just from the toilet, they have to wash their hands. But also this is an improvement to show that the water is available and the hand washing, the station is available, but the soap is also available. But there's also a dustbin. But the caveat here is to make sure that whatever these modifications are, we need to make sure that they are sufficiently maintained. For instance, if it is water, then it is usually always available, and if it is soap, then it is always available. So environmental modification, just to ensure that learners are being reminded to get to where the hand washing stations are. That's the second avenue. And then the next slide, we talk about using appropriate messaging. And I'm sure we know that the issue of hygiene has been introduced or is rather part of the curriculum, but within COVID, we need to emphasize the importance of hygiene and hygiene education, especially within the context of WASH, but also just to be sensitive to the fact that at different age groups, learners use different methods of learning. So how do we relay hygiene-related messages to learners at different levels of learning? And so here I've tried to specify some of the approaches that we can use. For instance, at the pre-primary level, when students are between the ages of 3 to 5, these are learners who are really playful, and so we can use some strategies such as hand washing songs, as we always hear, wash your hands, sing the happy birthday song and all that. But we can also have storybooks and a reward system, or using dolls and puppets to keep the learners engaged. But that's also just to simplify the message so that learners are able to understand the importance of hand washing with soap, especially during the COVID-19 times. When we get to the primary level, then we can use different strategies, because these are kids who range from the age of 6 all the way up to 14 years. And so as we explore this, as we try to deliver the hand washing and the hygiene messages, we can use the same approaches, for instance, hand washing songs, especially at the lower level, and then illustrative books as the kids grow older, but also making sure that the instructors or the teachers simplify the messages. And as the students or the learners grow older towards the upper primary level, then we also have demonstrations and exercises that really emphasize on the importance of hand washing. Of course, also emphasizing that right now, hand washing is not that it's new, but it's just that we need to have it actually done every other time. So then after that, as we get to the next slide, as we get then to the secondary school level, then to the secondary school level, next slide. These are then students who are about 14 and up to about 17 years, and of course teenagers. But then how do we engage them, and how do we ensure that we relay the right hygiene-related messages? And strategies that we can use are, for instance, using interactions and discussions, just interacting with these students and ensuring that we are delivering the right messages. Also using theater and drama, because they are really into such opportunities and into such avenues. And also during teaching, we could emphasize that, but also with the media now being very instrumental, and also social media, then that's also an avenue that we can use, especially for learners who possibly are in day schools and have access to phones. Now, when we get to the tertiary level, of course, these are adults, so we can integrate hygiene messages in some of the courses that are being offered. And I'm sure this is not something new, but just to emphasize that it's an avenue that now can show the importance of hygiene in most of the tertiary level institutions. Again, we can use the theater and the media, but also just to emphasize that in all this, we still need an enabling environment, which is where we talked about having adequate water and having adequate soap available within these learning institutions. Next slide. Yeah, so having said that, and I'm coming to the end of the presentation shortly, the other thing we need to consider is to make sure that, and I'm sure I've mentioned this, is to emphasize that we need to frequently wash our hands. Some kids may require, or some learners, especially at the low level, may require a schedule or a routine that enables them to remember when to wash their hands. But that also goes along with the reduction of exposure or surfaces. And like I mentioned earlier, these avenues work together. So we just need to ensure that surfaces where learners are learning from are also clean and they are also sanitized. And that also requires having adequate water and having adequate soap within the learning institutions. So just to acknowledge that most of this information is available at the Hygiene Hub, and you can Google and get a lot of this information, but also thanks to the Institute of Economic Affairs for this opportunity to share such information and to be part of this team. Yeah. Thank you very much for listening.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sheila, for that very elaborate discussion you have taken us through, and just bringing us up to speed with the happenings within the WASH sector and what we can possibly do to ensure that our learners are back in school and are safe even as we prepare. So we will move on to our next presenter, who is Miss Agnes Makanyi. Miss Agnes works with UNICEF Kenya under the Water and Sanitation Program, and she's a water and sanitation expert. So Miss Agnes has 15 minutes, and she will be also taking us now home, where the discussion should now be taking place, back to schools and explaining to us what it means to have WASH preparedness and the cost implications. Miss Agnes, 15 minutes, thank you.
Thank you, Winnie. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to discuss the WASH in schools preparedness, which is a key topic, which I'm sure we are all interested, because most of us are parents in schools, and they would really look forward to the schools reopening. We need the first slide, please. Winnie, if you can go to the first slide.
Let me share that again.
Okay.
Can you see it?
Yes, just move to the first slide.
We're actually on the first slide.
Okay, yeah, that's the first slide now. But just, okay. Just reshare. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I hope we can see the slides.
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so I just want to give you a bit of background, but because Sheila has covered, I'll just go very quickly on that. It's just to point that water, sanitation, and hygiene schools really improves the learning environment in schools, and there is a positive impact, especially for girls' enrollment, especially the adolescent girls, because of the issues of tension and transition in addressing the menstrual hygiene management issues in schools. WASH in schools also leads to a decrease in diseases, and especially now that we are talking about COVID-19, it's very key in reducing the water-related diseases. We know that school closures has really interrupted learning for over 17 million students in Kenya, and that's why it's an important topic for us to discuss. In order for us to safely reopen the schools, it's critical to ensure that we have the safe learning environments to protect the children, teachers, and other staff from transmission of COVID-19. And to ensure that we have this safe environment, then we need to have in place basic wash services, which include the hand washing, water supply, soap, waste bins, and hygiene promotion. Next slide. So what is the situation in our schools, or what problem do we want to address? As you can see in that picture, this is the situation we find when we go to the schools. And you find that most of the schools lack the drinking water, sanitation, and hand washing facilities. or in the places where they are really inadequate in terms of quality and in terms of the quantity. So you can see here about the quality. This toilet has no doors, it's not clean, so that means it's not usable. And then in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, all schools are required by the government to have measures in place to ensure safe reopening. So with this situation on ground, then it becomes a difficult situation for them. And then the adolescent girls in particular, even before COVID, they would miss school during menstruation, mainly because of social and cultural beliefs, the taboos, the myths which are associated with menstruation, and also lack of sanitary pads, which will enable them to go to school. And we also have the issue of gender segregated toilets. In some schools, we don't have toilets separated for boys and girls. So this becomes difficult for adolescent girls to be in school. We also water supply lacking and private washing facilities in school. If the girl sends the dress in school, how can she be able to address this issue? So this becomes also a challenge. And then also children with special needs, children with disability. Do we have toilets which meet their needs so that they can be comfortably in school? So this is the problem as we think of the solution of children and schools reopening. This is the real situation we have in the schools. Next slide. And just to bring in some data on what is happening in schools, we have the National Education Management Information System. This is the system by Minister of Education where they collect data in schools on enrollment, and also they narrow to the infrastructure, the classrooms and the latrines. So the data we've gotten from them says that 23% of the schools they got information from have no access to water supply at all. And of the 77% who have access to water supply, only that 2% have access to tap or piped water. So this already shows you the low coverage or the low percentage of the schools which have access to water. And 18% of this rely on rainwater. And rainwater we know is seasonal and they don't have adequate facilities to be able to store this water. 19%, very small percentage on boreholes and 8% on rivers. So that shows you that children have to. Also, the data does not indicate whether the toilet or the facility is functional or not. So we don't know whether it's usable or not. So this is just a lump sum data. And then we don't have data at all on hand washing facilities. So that is the information we have nationally. And just the photo you can see there is to bring out, give you an example of the toilets we do to ensure that children with disability can access the toilets. So these are the kind of toilets which are also missing in most of the schools. Next slide. So just to continue about the situation in WASH in schools, as UNICEF, we have done a number of surveys and also microplan, which means looking at every school in 4 counties, Kitui, Kisumu, Migori, and Trans Nzoia, and we able to map the WASH facilities in every school. And in this data, just in summary, it shows a lot of variations. Like, for example, Trans Nzoia County, access to water supply was found to be 77%, while in Migori is as low as 35%. And then again in Trans Nzoia, 43% of schools and washing facilities compared to 53% in Migori. So I'm giving you this data just for you to have in your mind as you see the situation and how to support the schools. And then in Kisumu, it varied from one sub-county to another, ranging from 52% to 77%. So there's a lot of disparity in terms of access to water supply and also hand washing facilities. And this just to help us see a picture of what is happening in our schools as we get into issue of preparedness. Next slide, please. Now, just to give you a case of Kitui and what the study we did in Kitui. In terms of Sub-Saharan Africa, we really don't have sufficient data. In terms of the world, we have around 69% of schools with basic water, 12% with limited, and 19% with no service. When we talk of basic water, this means the school has access to an improved water source, a borehole, piped water, protected well or spring, and the water was available at the time of the survey. When it is limited, it means the school has access to the improved facility, but at the time of survey, there was no water available. That means there are issues with management, maybe it's not functioning. And then no service means the school does not have access to water or is getting water from unimproved sources like the rivers and unprotected wells. Now, when you look at Kenya, it's talking of 75% of schools have a limited service. So that shows a high level of unreliability of the water supply, and then 25% have no service at all. This data is gotten from the NEMIS, so it's just reflective of what I have mentioned earlier. And then when we looked at now the detailed one in Kitui, it shows that in that county, 45% of the schools have basic water. That means they have an improved water source and they had water available at the day of the survey. That 1% have limited water service, meaning that they did not have water available. And then 24% did not have any service. So this is just to give you an example of the county and how the other counties also may be looking like as we get into the interventions. Next slide, please. And in terms of sanitation and hygiene, for Kitui County is not very bad. At least 87% have access to basic sanitation. This means they have an improved sanitation facility like a flush toilet or a pit latrine which has a slab and which can be used. So at that time when they visited, then that latrine was in good condition and functional, and it could be used by the children. 10% had limited sanitation facilities, meaning the facilities were not functional, either with no door or not accessible, so they could not use properly the toilets, just like the one I've showed you in the first photo. And then 3% did not have any sanitation facility at all. And then in terms of the hygiene, that is the washing facilities in between, 26% of the schools only have access to the hygiene facilities. These hygiene facilities means that at that day of the survey, this school had the hand washing facility and water available at the school. So only 26%, and then 21% had a limited service, meaning the hand washing facility but no water and soap available. And then 53% no service at all. So no hand washing facility available and soap, or if the hand washing facility was available, there was no water available. So this gives us a good indication when we are talking about prevention of COVID-19 transmission and emphasizing on hand washing. Only 26% of the schools have these hand washing facilities. So the rest, 74%, has to be addressed urgently to have the hand washing facilities in place. Next. Next slide, please. So just to sum it up, in Kitui, we were able to visit 1,887 schools. The ones which had their main supply on site in the school were 51.5%. Piped water was for 22% of the schools, and rainwater harvesting 29%. Just to mention, the rainwater harvesting is really only able to provide the schools water storage for only a week. So we don't consider it very reliable. And then for 40.5% of the schools, they did not have water in the school. So they rely on getting water from vendors or getting it from unimproved, where it's mainly the children who carry water to school. So that gives you an overview of the situation of what is happening in our schools and the situation in our schools. Next. So just to summarize about the water risks, we have seen that over 50% of the schools do not have a hand washing facility, and also there are water quality concerns about the water available in schools in terms of fluoride. E. coli means fecal contamination, salinity, and nitrate. And then over 80% of the schools, they're using rainwater harvesting tanks, with 40% having the storage for a week or less. So that becomes a concern, because they do not have adequate storage facilities for that. And then for a number of schools, around 25%, then they to prevent the water during the dry season. In terms of water management, we found that there's a weak coordination between the national and county mandates, which leaves each school to work alone. And as you know, the Ministry of Education is no default, and that's where the schools fall. And so this becomes an issue in terms of coordinating. And then 22% of schools only had piped water on site, and there were major concerns about availability of water, that 5% did not have the water available, and then reliability also for 26%, meaning that the water may be available today, tomorrow it's not available. So there's no continuity of service. We also have the issue of cost because they have to buy, and distance because and then also for primary schools, we saw that 8 times they are more likely to report people carrying water to school than in secondary schools. So they have to really bring water from home because they don't have water available in the schools. And then also there are issues about funding inequalities, where we have mainly the secondary schools spending more time or more funds procuring water than in primary schools. And then also there's the high cost of the water brought to the schools at 1,000 Kenyan shillings per cubic meter. That's very expensive. So some of the challenges were that most of the teachers were relating absenteeism to school to sickness, fees, and lack of food or water. And then 3 in 5 schools have no water for menstrual hygiene management. So that again will contribute to absenteeism by the adolescent girls. And then the male teachers do not relate water concerns with menstrual hygiene management, but female teachers do, but only a third of the staff. I think you remember the case of the girl who had to take her life because of menstrual hygiene management and a relation with the teacher. So it's also important if the teachers can be sensitized and they are aware of how MHM can be handled properly in the schools. Next slide. Hello, next slide, please. Winnie, next slide.
Winnie?
Okay, yeah, thank you. So that gives you a situation of the schools and a background. And now we'll just take you briefly through the minimum wash requirements for school reopening. These are the guidelines which are being developed by Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Irrigation, and UNICEF. So we convened a smaller group, part of the Wash in Schools working group, and we were able to come up with these guidelines which have been shared with Ministry of Education, and they have been adopted for assessment of the schools to ensure that they are safe. So one of the key requirements we have said as a part of the minimum is hand washing facilities. So we've provided guidelines that these have to be distributed at appropriate locations, as Sheila mentioned, so that they are accessible to the children and they can be able to practice hand washing. We say that preferably we can have the water tanks with 100 liters or greater and with a single tap because of the physical hand washing. We have been promoting group hand washing, but with the issue of physical distancing or social distancing, then we are advising the schools to procure these water tanks, which can be used by 1 people at one time to be able to keep the physical distancing. And then we are recommending 1 tap for 25 children so that we are able to at least have the children wash within a reasonable time. And considering that they have to wash many times, as Winnie pointed out, so that they don't congest or they don't take a very long time to be able to wash their hands. Next. So these guidelines will help the schools to be prepared in terms of the key requirements of hand washing in the schools. The next minimum requirement is water availability. For these children and the schools to be able to practice proper hand washing with soap for 20 seconds, then they need to have continuous water available, or borehole or protected springs or well, and this water has to be available. And the guide we are giving is that for those schools which are day schools, then the basic water needs for drinking and washing and cooking, they need to have at least 5 liters per child per day. That is those who have pit latrines. But those who have flushing toilet, then they need to have 25 liters per day per person. But boarding schools, they need to have 50 liters per person per day if they are flushing toilet. So we are considering that if this water is provided, then at least we can be able to meet the needs of hand washing, flushing, cooking, and any other needs which are required in the school. So this water supply and the availability need to be provided. And in addition, water storage has to be provided to make sure that at least the water is stored for 5 days in a week to make sure that it So this goes together with the hand washing facilities to make sure that we have water available for washing and also for flushing. Next slide, Winnie. Next slide. Thank you very much, Winnie. So the other key requirement which we have put in the guidelines is that we need to have supplies, and the supplies mainly include the soap, the detergents, and hand sanitizers. So for the children to be able to effectively practice the hand washing, they need to have access to soap, and the school needs to compute or estimate how much soap they need per week, and this can be then procured by the school so that they have at least a weekly supply of these consumables. And then other supplies such as the brooms, the sponges, the buckets, and others like the protective equipment such as face masks, overalls, boots, and gloves for the cleaners need to be available for the cleaning teams to use. So we are advocating that they really need to be protected. They have to have the PPEs so that they are fully protected as they are cleaning these toilets. Before, the children have been cleaning, but now we are advocating that we have cleaners in place and they have adequate PPE to be able to clean. Next. Next slide. So as Winnie moves to the next slide, I hope you can see the photos. They are also speaking to what we are doing in schools as UNICEF in promoting a full wash package. In terms of the other key requirement for the schools to reopen is cleaning and disinfecting. So the school needs to have a team of cleaners, which depends on the size of the school, and they need to be trained on cleaning and disinfection in relation to COVID-19. And we also are advising that this cleaning should be done in a routine manner to ensure that they also have a checklist in which they are putting together what time they are cleaning and the frequency of that. And then also in terms of the high-touch services like the door handles, the furniture, the services, they really need to be cleaned frequently with a disinfectant to make sure that we reduce the transmission of the disease. And then the cleaning tools also need to be cleaned and to be disinfected between the uses to make sure that they are safe to the cleaners and also to where they are being stored. So this is also the other key requirement which needs to be put in place by the schools next to ensure that these children are safe. And then the other component is on the waste management. We are advising that the waste in school should be segregated during storage, collection, and disposal. So they really need to be put well in those stages, and we should have separate bins. We should be at least in different colors or shapes so that they can clearly show where the hazardous materials like the masks, the gloves, the PPE, they are disposed. So that has to be clearly labeled, and the children and the school aware of what they should do. And then cleaning and disinfecting personnel shall be responsible of waste management. And they have to be trained on how to deal with this hazardous waste, because this is waste which has not been part of the school environment. You know, they have been putting all their waste in one place, the pits where they burn. But we don't want the children to be exposed to this kind of waste. So these teams have to be fully trained on that. And then the next key area is on physical distancing, where the children need to adhere to the 1.5 meters when they're utilizing the wash facilities. As you can see in this example, we have been promoting the group hand washing, but now we are not advocating for that because the children crowd as they wash their hands, because it takes up like 20 children at a time. But now we have to promote the single hand washing facilities. And also in the other facilities like classrooms, dining hall, dormitories, and libraries, the physical distance will need to be emphasized, although we know it's very difficult with the kind of classrooms, and ensure this safe distancing for them, safe environment. Next. So the physical distancing is being discussed more at a Ministry of Education level on how they can be able really to address even the other infrastructure in terms of the physical distancing. Next. So the other component is on your orientation and the training. We're proposing that the head teachers, the teachers need to be trained on how to apply the hygiene protocols. So we are mentioning on safe distancing and hygiene. So these key teachers and POM and also the children, they need to be trained on how they can be able to apply these hygiene protocols in the schools. And also the children need to be trained on personal cleanliness, the physical distances and hand washing through health clubs. We have school health clubs, and then this message can be now put across to all the children. And then in terms of training, we need to have proper communication materials to be distributed within the school to ensure that they are reminded all the time on the proper hand washing. And then the materials for training should be approved by Ministry of Health and Education. And we already have materials which have been approved by Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development for hygiene promotion in schools and Ministry of Hygiene Management training in schools. We have also developed a simple checklist which the schools also can use for wash, infection, prevention, control assessment in the schools. And it has been piloted already by Ministry of Education in around 10 schools. And they say it's a very simple checklist which the schools can use to be able to assess their preparedness and what they need to put in place to make sure that they are ready. And next. Next slide. So that is the minimum requirements. That's what the schools need to put in place as their minimum requirements. I just wanted to give you an idea of the cost estimates, but maybe I may not go into the details, but we are saying that if we assume that 50% of the schools do not have the hand washing facilities, as you have seen from the data, then we need around US dollars 3.4 million to ensure that the schools have hand washing facilities, and 880,000 US dollars for the secondary schools, 3.4 million for primary schools and 880,000 for secondary schools to ensure that the schools have hand washing facilities. And we have used a cost estimate of $80 and for meeting 100 pupils. Now, in terms of soap, if we use the same population, then we need around 750,000 US dollars per month in the primary schools, and 2.2 million for the 2.2 million population in secondary schools, we need around $190,000 a month to make sure that the children are absorbed. So this is an estimate of around $10 for regular soap. If we get now to other antiseptic soap, then it becomes more expensive. So that's just to give you an idea on the basic hand washing and soap, not even considering how the water will get to the school. Next, Winnie. Next slide. Next. Do you have challenges I share? Okay, so just an example of the detailed costing. If the school has to be provided a 5,000 liter tank, then they'll need around $3,200 to put that tank in place for 100 pupils for 2 weeks, so that they have 5 liters per pupil per day. And for schools which have no existing water connection, then extending them to an existing water community source and providing a 5,000 liter tank elevated and 2 mass hand washing facilities will cost around $6,700. These are just a guide, but we will need to do technical surveys to be able to estimate what are the requirements for each school so that they have a reliable minimum supply of drinking water. And just to mention that we did a wash in schools costing guide, which can be able to provide these estimates to any stakeholders or any partners who would want to know the cost and be able to provide this to the schools, and we can avail that. Next, so that we move a bit faster. Yeah, so that's just an idea in terms of stakeholders, how you would contribute and participating to meeting these needs in the schools. In terms of a full wash package, water sanitation and hygiene package, where you have the water supply, the sanitation, the hygiene promotion, and the hand washing facilities. If you are to provide a borehole for a school which is not close to any existing water source, then you need around 50,000 per school with 300 children. If the school is near an existing water source like a pipeline or borehole, then this comes to around half the cost, $25,000 per school with 300 children. These are just guiding estimates. We need to do the actual assessment for the school to understand the needs and the requirements, but this gives an idea of the cost and what we have been implementing in the schools. Next, and that just shows you one of the Gauss blocks which we do in the schools with the talking messages to remind the children of hand washing and safe sanitation in the schools. Next. Yeah, so as Winnie moves on, so this is just a ventilated improved pit latrine, which has a girls' bathroom for menstrual hygiene management, and then also hand washing facilities, which is a hand washing sink attached to the school. Just an idea of some of the support we have provided to the schools. I'm just showing there some of the documents we have supported. We have the menstrual hygiene management policy and strategy, which has been approved and launched on 28 May, and it's available to support on menstrual hygiene management issues and to guide. We also have the life cycle budgeting for wash services in the primary schools in Kenya, a guide which can help in the costing requirements. Then we have the standards and guidelines for wash infrastructure in schools. So if you want to build the facilities, this gives you the guidance on the designs, the costing, and how you can go about, even the school, how they can go about getting contractors or artisans to do the facilities. Then we have hygiene promotion in schools, which has been approved by Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, and menstrual hygiene management in schools also approved by Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development. which can be used to train the teachers on menstrual hygiene management in schools. So let's just move on. I will not go to the rest of the details. I just wanted it for your awareness on the materials available there. And we also have the School of Policy, which is approved also, and it's also with one of the matrix areas is WASH, in addition to the others, and that guides very closely on when you want to implement WASH in schools, what are the guidelines we should put in place. And next, and just to respond to the COVID-19, we have already filled 400 hand washing facilities for schools to be able to practice hand washing. That map just shows where we have been implementing since 2012. We have national activities, as I've mentioned, and also at the school level, where we provide the 2 blocks, one for boys, one for girls, for the sanitation facilities, the water supply connection, and washing facilities, menstrual hygiene management, and hygiene promotion. Next. Yeah, so this is just a final slide on the recommendations. In terms of these minimum requirements, we need to develop a communication plan. How can this information now reach out to policymakers, head teachers, boards of management, parents, private sector, and any other stakeholder who's really concerned about having our schools safe for reopening? So we need to communicate this through radio, TV, through printed material, on how we can sensitize everyone on what is required to make the schools safe. And then we also need high-level advocacy with the government for budget allocation for provision of wash facilities in schools. Our schools are not in a good situation, and it's heavy in terms of the cost. So the government needs to come in well to be able to support the schools to improve the coverage of water, sanitation and hygiene facilities to be able to address the gap, and not forgetting also the menstrual hygiene management component, which impacts on the girls, the adolescent girls who are at school. And then finally, we need evidence generation for advocacy on WASH in schools. We need to be able to have adequate data and prepare the case studies or the information to be able to present to the government, treasury, and other donors to be able to advocate for more support in the schools if they have to change their situation and become a friendly learning environment. Next. So that should be the end. Just to say thank you very much. The next slide just shows the conduct. If you need to get more information from UNICEF, and you need to know how we can provide technical support in terms of implementation. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening and creating time to listen to WASH in schools. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Agnes, and we are very sorry about the technical problems we've been having today. I believe we were keenly following the conversation we were having with you, and we feel it's for me it's very insightful because it takes me back again to the example of the school I was giving in Kisumu, which only has 5 taps. And as you were having the conversation, I tried to calculate, and I realized that for that school to be WASH prepared, they need 120 taps to ensure that only 25 learners are using 1 tap. So those are some of the things that we wanted to break down and bring to our understanding, so that when we are having these conversations of reopening school, we actually know where we need to put the pressure. So yes, we've been talking about the social distance even in our previous webinars, and you can clearly see that even as an aspect of WASH, social distance is one of the strategies that is being used. So as we are putting pressure to have our schools reopen, now we are in the know in terms of data representation and what is actually happening in our schools WASH related, and we can now have very, very strong and insightful conversations with the relevant stakeholders. We had indicated that we will be talking about the minimum requirements, and now I know we are all aware about the minimum requirements that we should be looking out for in our schools, and we know the cost implications. So when you're talking about budgetary allocations for the schools in terms of WASH, we know where our focus should be. And even in terms of enforceability, we now know that it doesn't stop with the head teachers who are currently undergoing training. There has to be continuous training, even for the support staff, even for the teachers, and most importantly for the learners, so that when the teachers are trying to enforce these measures, the learners actually understand why it is important that they follow those instructions to the letter. So thank you so much to our panelists, and I will be welcoming my colleague John to take us through the plenary session. Remember, we were encouraging the use of the text box, but at this point, we also allow the use of the hand-raising icon, where you can use it to raise your hand, and we'll give you a chance to voice your question. So I'll hand this over to John.
Thanks a lot, Winnie, and to our able panelists, Dr. Sheila Simiyu and Engineer Agnes Makani. Before we get into the plenary session, I would like to request, is it Professor Muroki? Would you mind? Would you kindly turn off your camera? Professor Muroki? Yeah, kindly turn off your camera, please.
Okay, I'll do that right away.
Yeah. Okay, so we are very grateful for these insights that have been shared by our two panelists, and of course, thank you, Winnie, for setting the stage in terms of the minimum requirements, the cost implication, and some questions about enforceability. Of course, the two panelists have also basically rehashed the benefits of WASH in schools, or WASH generally. And for instance, in schools, the two key benefits we have, of course, the fact that it promotes learning performance, enrollment, especially for girls. And of course, this reduces water-related, is key in terms of reducing water-related diseases. And then the two panelists also shared some of the requirements, and at least Engineer Agnes Makani was quite elaborate in terms of the requirements. And actually, as she was going through those minimum requirements, the list of the minimum requirements, my head was just running to the issue of what I was waiting to see is also the cost, because obviously there's a cost implication in terms of ensuring that these minimum requirements are met by the schools. And one key thing that I picked or noted is that from Dr. Agnes, Engineer Agnes's presentation, she mentioned that there's no data. There's no data on hand washing facilities in schools from NEMIS. Of course, we have that data. We have from the Kenya Integrated Household Budget Survey, distribution of hand washing facilities for households near toilet facilities by counties that is available. We do not have the same for schools. And this is actually speaks to the issue that she mentioned, that of course with lack of evidence, then it becomes very difficult for governments, for intervention basically, because lack of evidence actually makes it difficult to know how to intervene or where to intervene for that matter. And then I also noted that in the entire discussion, especially by Engineer Makani, with regard to the minimum requirements, she mentioned the three ministries: Ministry of Education, Health, Water and Sanitation. So as much as yes, education is, especially primary and secondary, those are not devolved. But I was just wondering, where is the role of where is the county? Where are the county governments in all this? Or do they have any role indeed in regard to issues of WASH in schools? And maybe that's something that Engineer Makanyi can speak to during plenary. So those are some of the things that I picked, and now I would like to open it up for chat box. As I can see currently, we do not have any questions in the chat box. So feel free to either unmute yourself or you can use the raise your hand icon. So we'll have 2 rounds of Q&A. So for the first round, we can take anyone, maybe we'll take about 4 questions. So you can introduce yourself and mention who you'd like to direct the question to of the 2 panelists. So anyone? Do we have any questions? Yes, Professor Muroki, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. My sincere apologies for that camera, for that whatever with the camera. Now, a quick one. I've listened, to that very fascinating evidence-based presentation on WASH implications for reopening of schools, and I'm glad you made a follow-up question on the dimension of cost. If I was the CS education now, and I'm thinking about what capitation should be sent to primary schools. I think it was called the minimum package. How is that? Do we have a unit cost estimates? How much that would be just for WASH? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for that. So I believe that is directed to the 2 panelists, at least, especially do you have any? At least 2 more questions before we get into the before we allow the to those. Okay, as we wait, sorry.
Kidogo. Apologies for that technical glitch. No. So I'll just read again. There's a question from Joanne. Again, this is directed to she would like to know whether there's an assessment that has been done, any report that shows the level of preparedness of schools. So, Engineer Happiness, you can also weigh in on that. And I can also see that Swansea, before Fraser, you have your hand raised, so please unmute your question. Fraser? Hello?
Yes, hi, good morning. So, my name is Teresa Swansea. I'm with SMB Ghana. So, I missed a bit on the presentation of UNICEF. But then, as a country, we're also planning on reopening schools in January. And one of the conversation is the active participation of parents. So as we are planning, I'm also interested in knowing if you've done any discussion or communications with parents. In the fact that once we open schools, yes, we are trying to have wash facilities in the schools. Are they also planning on having the same in the homes so that it's a more balanced equation of having the wash facility at both the schools and then at the homes? So have you had any conversation with parents on their participation? Thank you.
Thank you, Bafo. Any other question? I would like to invite both our panelists, to respond to those questions. So the last one by both Sheila and Agnes can weigh in. But let's start with Agnes, please.
Thank you very much, John, and also the comments you have received. You asked about the role of the counties in Washington. As you know, mutual education is not yet evolved. So in terms of the schools, they are under mutual education. This is not yet developed. But there are the application plan which is provided to the schools. And there's a budget line on environment and another one on water, which can be used to improve this activity. Now, in terms of the county, the agricultural development is evolved. So the county government has encouraged clearly to support the ECDs, although they have not started on the preparedness of school, but the information we have been informed is that the preparedness for what in terms of COVID has been included in the county area development plan. So they have been included as part of their plan, and they have been included and budget on the requirements which are needed. So that is to ensure this is a
kuna problem with power. Kuna problem with power. Kuna problem na steam. There's a problem with power. With power? Yeah. Wanatatumia tu simu. Kwa nini?
inaanza in the next
What could be the problem today? Power.
power. Which
Yeah.
Yeah, entire
Block.
Before the
are we
generator
using the
peaks,
generator?
Yeah.
before the generator peaks,
Oh.
just want the release.
Swansea.
I don't know that you got disconnected. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Apologies. Apologies. We have. I think we are currently using the power outage in the entire office block. So.
Okay.
We apologize for that. Yeah. Please carry on. So you were talking about the county government and you're actually talking about the ECD.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's okay. So I was saying the ECDs are involved and the county is fully responsible for that. And in the area development plan, they have included how they will support waste procurement in the schools in terms of COVID-19 response. So I was saying that the primary schools and the Ministry of Education is not really involved, but because the ECD is part of the primary, we believe that we can advocate to the county government to support these primary schools so that they are also prepared in that support. We have been working with the county water department and they have paid their mandate to connect the water supply to schools. So we believe that during this procurement for the schools coming to be able to support also connection to water. The main challenge we have is on sanitation. Because sanitation comes under Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Irrigation recently, and before it was under Ministry of Health. So this one has to be fully covered by the Ministry of Education, and this is the main task in terms of the role by the county. So the clear role for the county is the ECD, but the primary school and the Ministry of Education. So we have continued to advocate with the National Ministry of Education to allocate some budget to covering waste in the primary school. Professor Muraki asked about the unit estimates for this minimum requirement, and in my presentation, I was able to cover the cost for handworking facilities, which I said for US anywhere, to be able to get two handwashing facilities. I used calculation of 6 pieces per one. So if you use that one was one and this and increase by when you need US dollars 8 and the people. So to put the working facilities in the primary schools is going to cost 6.4 million US dollars to be able to address that. And then I also get the figure for the secondary school. So that estimate I have given, and for the cost, we are putting it around the US dollars 10 per month per teacher to be able to meet it. So the handwashing facility is provided at the school. And then for collecting water pipeline and adding the tank, we have provided that we need around US dollars 670,000. So that's around 670,000 to be able to connect it to near a pipe water or a community level. Then you pipe the water to the school and give them a 5,000 liter tank elevated at 3 meters and connect to handwashing facilities. Then you need around 670,000. And we are only enhancing the project for this school. Then to give them a tank of 5,000 liters, we need around 320,000. And we are providing the tank plus the gathering system, and so that means very able to get some water. Or just to do if the government is able to provide some water traffic and system to the school. So report and what is involved to be able to provide this minimum practice to the school. And then the other question on whether any assessment has been done on preparedness of schools. Ministry of Education have indicated that they have done assessment of the schools to check on their preparedness using this checklist and another broad checklist which they developed, but they say they have only sampled a number of schools. So we are working with them, and they have requested that we can work closely with them to now get out the
Hello? Agnes? Continue, please carry on.
Yes, so the assessment has been done by the Ministry of Education, but only for some sample schools, and we are following up to get the data. And the plan is to organize a working school which is working with many members, and then we can share this data, and the partners can be able to highlight where they can be able to support funding. And in terms of whether the discussion has been done with the parents, we have not yet got the level of the parents, but we have discussed the meeting education in this small group, water, and health, and we have highlighted that it's important to prepare a communication plan which communicates to stakeholders, including the parents. Because you know, in the school we spend a lot, some of the parents will even drink water for school use to indulge the children from school with drinking again. So it's important to involve the parents for their participation, but we have not yet gone to that level that we discussed in the working group. It's important that the parents are closely involved and that they participate to ensure that the schools are safe for the opening, especially as the rule of schools to know about peak parents with access to water, and there is the arid and semi-arid land which do not have even water and with a huge challenge. Thank you very much. Over to you, John.
Thanks a lot, Agnes. Dr. Smil.
Thanks, John. I think Agnes has mentioned most of the things, but just to emphasize on the last point that was raised by I think Teres, who still has her hand up. And just to build up on what Agnes is saying, that even though that has not started, but we recognize the fact that parents really play a large role, not only parents, but also kids in taking the message back home to the parents. And this is hygiene messaging, whether the need for water, whether the importance of hygiene at the school environment, but that message can still be taken back home. So just emphasize that it can work both ways in terms of parents supporting, but also kids are also very instrumental again in influencing parents' behavior. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dr. Smil. I would like to invite our participants for another round, final round of questions and answer. If you have any question or comment, please feel free to either raise your hand or unmute your mic and shoot your question, please. And as our participants are preparing to do this, I have question actually to both the panelists. So I'm just wondering on the issue of whether the issue of sequencing is somewhat related to what Teresa had asked. If you have a situation where, for instance, there are no, you have hand washing facilities in school, but there are no hand washing facilities at home. Will the two of them have to be, in terms of emphasis and investment, whether it's for government and for the parents? I'm just wondering in relation to COVID and just sanitation related issues, whether having these facilities in school and not having them at home, whether that meets the main defeat the effort towards addressing COVID or issues related to wash, and hence the need for some kind of coordination to ensure the two are in So maybe Agnes or even Agnes and Sheila, you can weigh into that. And then I see a question from Kevin. Kevin is asking whether there is any budget allocated by government for washing school and what is the progress on this. So this can any of you can respond to that.
Yeah, let me tackle the first area where you're talking about wash, there being connectivity between wash other school levels and wash at the high school level. Now that's an ideal situation. I wish it would have been like that. That's perfect. But we know that it may not always be the case. In fact, I recall many times that done research and you find that at the household level, the household doesn't have access to the toilet or access to enough water. But what happens is the parents will tell me, for instance, that they send their children to school because they know that when the kids go to school, the kids will be able to access a toilet. The kids will have enough water. But we can't. It's an ideal situation to have both happening, but it's also a tall order. In as much as how once you have that, it is also quite a tall order to say that every household has that. Because the truth is there are very many people who don't have access to water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities. But the good thing also is that that message is still going out there. And as Agnes has alluded to it, a lot of advocacy is going on. And so maybe that still needs to be emphasized and they need to have that continuity when the students leave the school, when they come back home. There needs to be that continuity so that the hygiene practices are carried on even within the home environment. But to say that it must be there, I think that that's a tall order, but it's an idea. Thank you, Sheila. Just one more thing Sheila has said. Yes, animals in facilities in the home and in challenge. I think was based on the data that was saying is 20% Koreans who have animals in facilities. But with the issue of COVID-19, there's been a lot of campaigns that everyone needs to practice anti-washing water in school. So now we have not seen the scientific studies that I think this is the out of label, especially in the home settlement. So we give them the basket with the towel and the soap for 3 months for COVID-19 risk. So I think we will continue to advocate the Sheila said that as they practice that washing at school, they need to practice at home. And so the parents can take the children are trained to know how to make what we call physical. Just from single containers, they are trained on how to make their working facilities at home. And then the parents will be precise on how to buy so that the children can continue to wash their hands. So they can practice at home and at school and at home. And the ideal education is very important so that these children encourage the message home to the parents that we also need to practice and work at home, not in school alone. So these are something that a lot of just now and at the current COVID-19 workplaces is household, we believe should be better now, but that question will continue. Leaders need to do the change target and the information they get from school, they communicate to the parents so that they give equal attention. Now the question on the budget allocation for working by the government, that's why the state was clear yet, and hospitals are reporting that they are going to receive funding for mutual education for their success. So you said we are having a focus meeting with the Ministry of Education, the Cabinet Secretary. We have even shared this posting guide they have shared with you, with them and the guidelines, and that's what they're using to receive. So we are organizing for further meetings to advocate that the budget can be released to the schools so that they start preparing for the opening budget. We are talking now, no resources yet. And the even the regular FTV, which is normally the key. in the school. So the schools are different situations with their own demands, and so they need for everybody to advocate to the government to be able to give some budget to start preparing. Thank you.
See, we are 5 minutes to the end of our forum. So I'll give an opportunity to any final question before I invite our panelists to make final remarks and for Winnie to let us know where we go from this. Any there seems to be no what I see here from Lilian. I mean, Lilian is grateful for the insights that two panelists have shared. And for her, one of the things that struck her was the issue of hand washing stations next to latrines and how this can help in terms of increasing distance between the taps and stations. For physical and help in terms of meeting the physical distancing requirements. Maybe to as I invite our two panelists to make their final remarks, again, this is to Agnes. So do we currently have any wash in schools budget item in the Ministry of Education? Do we have that? Or what happens? How do schools invest in terms of wash?
Yes, we have in the capitation plan, the guidance goes to the schools. We have one budget line to sanitation and environment, which is given, I can't remember the cost, but it's given per, I think it's around 30 shillings per pupil, so it's not much.
And that one the schools used to buy like the cleaning items, the soap, the brooms, the brushes. And then there's also another budget line for water. It's combined with electricity, water and electricity. So, and then there's another one for repairs, maintenance, which is used generally for classrooms, for toilets. So the schools have a budget line which they can use for wash, although it may not meet the requirements for new infrastructure. It is meant for maintenance, the continuous maintenance to ensure like the school is able to pay for water bill when they are connected to an existing pipeline, or they can buy some water tanks and also buy these cleaning items. So although it is minimal, I think it should be 225 shillings per pupil. It's minimal, but at least there is that goodwill from the government to allocate some budget line for wash, and that has been through the continuous advocacy from various stakeholders, UNICEF and others, that the government should prioritize washing schools. And the last financial year, actually, Ministry of Education had allocated $200,000 US, that's around 20 million for washing schools for the first time, just for infrastructure and other activities. So we are seeing the government through advocacy taking up washing schools, and right now they are also saying yes, it's a priority for school reopening. So we really advocating that they increase the budget for washing schools. Thank you.
Thank you. And your final remarks before I allow Sheila to also make her final remarks.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, mine is to thank